Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words for more dedicated Legacy action. For today's midweek meta deck, we are playing Mogged's Legacy Challenge winning Nadu deck. Now this is a deck with a lot of tutoring going on. We've not only got the Nadu Zenith, but we've got the Living Wish. Now the reason for this is, Nadu requires combo pieces to make it work. Like you need the Nomads en-Kor. And Nadu Zenith is great for fighting Nadu, but not so hot at fighting Nomads en-Kor. We've seen builds that run Chord of Calling, and this particular one is going for a Living Wish board. So that's kind of what we're doing here. So we've got a deep Living Wish board that I'll get into in a minute, but alongside this we've got classic cantrips you'd expect to see in a blue deck and some Force of Wills. We've got about 17 blue cards, so it's not the most, but it should be just about enough. It's like the minimum. We've got the Springheart Nantuko and the Endurance, which both let you loop your deck and do some good stuff. Bristly Bill is a bunch of counters and triggers, so you can get your Nadu going in a different way. Scavenging Ooze, which I think should be Keen-Eyed Curator, which is this little critter up here, but we're going to play the list as is, based on the challenge win. We've got Leovold, which is just a nice piece that can slow some people's roll down. And we've got a Grist as a piece of removal, which is basically the only piece of removal we have. So we might be leveraging this quite a fair bit sometimes. We've got Uro as an alternative win condition, and we've got a bunch of fast mana in Birds and Delighted Halfling, giving us uncounterable Uros, uncounterable Grist, uncounterable Leovold, uncounterable Uro. Pretty nice. And, an uncountable Bristly Bill, let's not forget. And we've got a Sylvan Safekeeper, which can start off our Nadu chains as well as protecting things. That's pretty much it. We've got Dryad Arbor hidden away in the mana base, a couple of basics, and one Lush Portico, and that's pretty much it. Sideboard-wise, we've got our combo pieces we can find with our Living Wish. We've got, this is all pretty much Living Wish apart from the Force of Vigors, which we'll sometimes board in for artifact decks, but that's pretty much it. We've got the Thassa's Oracle, so if we draw our entire deck, we can just win the game that way. Go to Drake to go and steal some scary creatures our opponents may have, and then like another Leovold. It's good enough for the main. We'll have another one on the board. We can curve 2 into 3 with that. Another Grist, again, we can curve 2 into 3. Bit of Graveyard Hate in Faerie Macabre and Endurance. When we board these in versus when we have them in the sideboard is something that we're going to have to contend with as we go forward. A Wastelands, we can blow up some problem lands that might be jamming us up. Boseiju can blow up some problem permanents too. I'm not wholly convinced on the Caracas and the Cavern of Souls here, but I think if you're trying to Living Wish, your opponent's probably going to counter that as the problem card rather than wait for you to get this Cavern of Souls, then play it, and then, oh no, I can't counter your thing now. But that's just my thoughts on the matter. And we've got Caracas, which can bounce some stuff as well. And another Springheart Nantuko for when we want that. So that's pretty much it. Deck list looks really cool. I've been very impressed by a Living Wish when I've been playing it lately, but I think this looks like the best shell I've seen it in, so let's see if that is the case. Right, remember to like and subscribe, and let's get Naduing. Okay, so I recorded this league, and it was great. I had a wonderful time, did some really nice, insightful commentary, and there was a problem with my microphone, so it didn't pick up any of it. So rather than trying to edit over the original file, I'm going to just do a replay using the Magic Online function. So we're going to have a little watch here. All right, so in game 1, we had to roll to 6, and we kept a hand that kind of has some stuff going on. We've got an emergency Force of Will. I was a little bit unhappy about the mana here, but we do have our combo available if we can just find the lands for it. So our opponent starts off on a Plane of Nexus. It's over to us. We draw a land, slam the Portico. We find a blue land. We definitely want to keep that, so we'll pass it. Our opponent plays an Urborg, a Vexing Bauble, and passes. We don't care about the Vexing Bauble, really. Like, it's going to mess with our Force of Will a little bit, but that's not the end of the world. It's not going to stop our actual combo. Then we're going to Living Wish here. We're going to pull out our Nadu and move on. Opponent's then cracking the bauble, so they need to find a bit of action because Nadu is a very quick clock. Because once we put it in play, we're just going to draw all the cards. It's going to be difficult. So our opponent now has an Ezra's Tower. They get a decent chunk of mana. They get to Sowing Micro Spawn here. So there's no point counterspelling this because we don't really care. We've got land. We'll eventually get there. So we play out our Bayou, go and Living Wish, get ourselves a Nomads, and then it's back to our opponent. They're going to come through, crash for a little bit of damage. It doesn't really matter that much. We get to untap here. So we're going to deploy the Nadu. Not expecting our opponent to have too much removal for it. They're not in the main deck in this sort of Cloud Post style deck. But they start doing some tapping of the mana here. They put Dismember on the stack. We decide to Force of Will this because they didn't expect much removal from our opponent. They copy their Urza's Towers. They have 2 Urza's Tower. They can once upon a time, they dig deep, get themselves another Micro Spawn, I think it was here. Yep, there it is. So they blow up one of our lands. So we need to draw a white source for that to work, but they bounce. They find a Caracas and bounce our Nadu. So this slows us down a bunch more. The Sylvan Safekeeper, we play Delighted Halfling. We've got the white source, so we play out the Nomads as well. She's got all of our pieces ready to rock and roll. Our opponent has to try and kill us this turn, really, because we can go off in response to a Caracas. Right, so we play a Tabernacle, which is a different problem. So here we are paying for our creatures with the Tabernacle. This is a really fun game, this one. Lots of back and forth. So what happens here is we pay for our creatures, we play the land, we're about to put the Nadu on the stack, and our opponent scoops knowing they're about to play the Nadu and doesn't want to play it out. So that's the end of game one, and then we go to the sideboard. I don't believe I sideboarded at all with this deck because there's nothing we really wanted to change, I don't think. Alright, so game two, our opponent mulligans into Oblivion and scoops up the game, so they don't want to have to play it out. Not the most exciting second game. Our hand was pretty solid here. We had the combo sewn up. We're looking for like a blue thing to pitch to our Force of Will, really. But we didn't have to do that immediately, so we're probably fine anyway. This hand looks pretty good to me, but our opponent just didn't want to play it out. So that was 1-0 in the books. Let's go to the second round. All right, welcome to the second round. We keep an opening hand here. We have ways of getting to our combo here. We need a little bit of mana fixing to get the white off of the Nomads, but that's fine. So we start off with a Ponder here. All right, so we get hit by a Wasteland. That's not too bad. We just then get to reload with a Birds of Paradise. Our opponent goes for a Vexing Bauble. So we play out a Sylvan Safekeeper and we Living Wish for the Nomads. So we're ready to rock and roll next turn. We play out the Safekeeper. Our opponent Wasteland us. So that is going to delay us for a turn here. Play out the land. We play out the Nadu. We do a little swing. Our opponent plays out a Tabernacle. Lots of Tabernacles today. That's the aim of the game, I guess. Just Tabernacle people out. But we can just play out the Nomads and we can start drawing a bunch of cards. And we can do this on our opponent's turn as well. So we're just drawing a whole bunch of cards here. And our opponent has had enough, which is not a surprise. So that is the end of game one. I think sideboard-wise, we didn't do anything here either. So let's just go to the second game. So we keep an opening hand. We've got the Halfling. We've got the Living Wish to go and find the Nadu. We've got the Nomads. We've got it all covered. We just need to make sure we can deploy them before our opponent messes with us. I'm expecting something like a green-white Depthsy style strategy or a Landsy style strategy. Not 100% sure exactly what our opponent's playing. But then they play an Exploration, and then they play a Burgeoning. This is a deck that Phil played on his channel the other day. So they explode out with a bunch of stuff. Sorry, we skipped through it a little bit there. And then I just play a Delighted Halfling, and then they play a whole bunch more permanents, including another one of those Tabernacles. So we pay for our Halfling. We go and get this Wasteland. Right, so we pass it over back to our opponent there with this Wasteland ready to go for the next turn. They copy a Wasteland with their Thespian Stage, which I think is a really odd play, because they know they've got a Wasteland coming, and we're probably going to Wasteland the Tabernacle. So they just want to try and remove all of our mana sources. But I think you could leave open the Thespian Stage there, and then maybe choose to eliminate the Tabernacle. Certainly an idea. So we take 3 from the Sowing Mica Spawn. The Halfling pays for itself. We Wasteland away their Tabernacle. We Greenstone Zenith for a Dryad Arbor because we need to get some more mana to play this game because we've been shut down a little bit by Wastelands. Alright, we get Wastelanded yet again. Our opponent forgot to attack that turn, which certainly helps us out. Finding this island is really handy for us. Allows us to start doing our cantrip stuff. As far as a Brainstorm here, we don't find any lands, which is awkward. So we're just going to be in a holding pattern for a couple of turns and hoping that our opponent doesn't draw a Dark Depths and win the game. So the Mica Spawn comes in this time. We take a hit. There's a Caracas. That's going to be another thing we have to deal with to do our Nadu combo. We can obviously go over the top of it a little bit. So this time we find the Forest. Put the Forest in. This allows us to then play the Uro uncounterably. So we're just kind of buffering our life total, digging through our deck. Like we have the tools to win. We just need the mana to put these tools into play. We've got this Force of Will that we can sit on and keep ourselves alive with for anything really spooky out there. Obviously, we can't do anything about Mica Spawn triggers, but we just have to kind of suck that up if it happens. This time we get a Ponder going. We set up a really nice Ponder here, where we play our Lush Portico to then mill over a card we don't want, and then we have the land underneath it. Yep. So we put this Light Halfling in the bin. We've got a Verdant Catacombs, I think it is, on top, and we're just trying for our opponent not to have anything too egregious that we have to worry about. So we're going to take another bash for 3. Our life turtle is a resource, might as well use it. And now we get to untap, and we have enough mana to deploy a Nadu and a Nomads en-Kor. So we play the Nomads out first, otherwise they can bounce the Nadu in response to us playing the Nomads. So then they plow. Now I think for a second here, I could Force of Will this, but we have another Nomads ready to go. I don't think it's too much of an issue, so I let it go. I would have fault somebody for hitting it right there and then, but we might as well just go for another turn cycle here. We're going to have to work through our opponent's Caracas anyway. Okay, so we get hit by the Caracas as expected. We draw a card off of it. And it's back to our opponent's turn. A Bashnash down again. A Maze of Ith, that doesn't impact us at all. So now our opponent's got 2 cards in hand. So they have to have 2 pieces of interaction for our combo here. So we deploy the Nomads. We deploy the Nadu. They decide in response, they want to Boseiju my Dryad Arbor. So we have less things to ping and get cards off of, which is fine. But that gives us another land so we can redeploy the Nadu after they Caracas it, which doesn't feel great to me. So we got our Nadu, it comes down, we start doing the thing, drawing all the cards. Got a Living Wish there, that's going to be pretty handy if our opponent makes us play this out. I suspect they're probably not going to, and I think that turns out to be the case in the very near future. Just doing our thing. We Green Sun Zenith for X equals 2 to get a Springheart Nantuko. We only do that once we have enough mana to replay the Nadu. So the Springheart Nantuko just gives us an endless supply of things that we can keep drawing cards with. So we're just going to keep spamming out all of our permanents here. We've got lots and lots of 1/1s. And our opponents had enough. So that is the end of round 2. We just kind of went over a Caracas. It's not good enough to beat what we're doing here because we do get to go off in response because of the power of Nomads. Whereas some of the builds that are running Shukos don't get to go off in response to Caracas. So that's an important thing to note there, like the more Stoneforge builds. But that's another 2-0 victory. So let's go to the third round. So I'm on the play here. We can't keep our opening hand because it's got no lands in it. Our second hand is fine. We've got some cantrips to find some stuff. We've got Delighted Halfling to accelerate out of this game. If our opponent's like a busted combo deck, then so be it, right? So we have a Delighted Halfling. We pass the turnover. It's at this point I recognise our opponent's username. We played their Legacy Challenge winning deck last week on the channel, and it was a red-black reanimated channel. A video, even. So I was like, oh, yes. I don't think I'm supposed to mulligan based on our opponent's name necessarily. And it did take me a while to remember the name. But anyway, so here we see our opponent casting an Entomb for a Grizzlebrand. They play a Shallow Grave, and they draw 7 cards on the stack, and I concede. Let's go to game 2. Sideboarding was kind of important on this one. So for the sideboarding, what I did here was I boarded in both of our pieces of graveyard hits. I figured I wouldn't want to have to spend 2 mana to find them. I just want more chance of having them in our opening hand. And I think I also boarded in a Caracas. I think I just boarded out some of the slower stuff like... I don't think I boarded out Uro because I think we had to keep the Uro in. We brought out Bristly Bill and the Safekeeper. Alright, let's go and play this game. So this opener we have gives us access to counter magic, which is nice. We have a Living Wish, which unfortunately I boarded in all my graveyard hate for. So that was very annoying. But we have a Green Sun Zenith that can go and find a Scavenging Ooze. Given the nature of our deck, it's not really getting much better than this. So we start off with the Nomads, so we can maybe try a turn 3 kill if that's just what we need to do here, and hope that the Force of Will is the bridging that we need for it. So our opponent Dark Rituals, if Fate will push us, they Entomb. So I counter this Entomb. If they don't have creatures in the yard, it's going to be harder for them to combo off. So now we kind of got to reassess the situation. So I have a choice here. We don't have any graveyard hate, so I Living Wish, and I go and fetch the Gilded Drake, figuring if they want to reanimate something, then we're going to get it off of them. And that way our opponent has to have some discards first, and that's going to slow them down a little bit. That was my logic on this one. So they unmask, targeting themselves. They've been off the Archon of Cruelty. Then they use their last card in hand to reanimate their Archon of Cruelty. So this play is kind of wild to me. So I go, okay, we're going to steal your creature. They just played directly into this. That seems good to me. So we get their Archon of Cruelty. Then we pass over. Now our opponent attacks. Our opponent has drawn 2 random cards at this stage. One off the Archon of Cruelty trigger and 1 for turn. So we know that we don't know what they have in hand. But they attack here. This is kind of a weird attack to me. I think about it for a second, and then I decide to block because it's going to die next turn anyway when we attack. So what is the harm in blocking here? Now, what is the harm in blocking here is a question that's about to be answered. Because our opponent then, in the second main phase, they decide to reanimate our Gilded Drake, and then they get their Archon of Cruelty back. Now, this would have happened 1 turn later anyway. They had cards that they could sandbag the reanimate, so that's not an issue. So this was just... We could have had 1 attack with an Archon of Cruelty to strip their hand a little bit and kill the creature, and we would have waited an extra turn for this. So that felt like a real awkward play for us. Our opponent had to have drawn one of those 2 cards from there, and it had to be the reanimate because they didn't have the mana right now. So we go to our turn, and then we see that we would have drawn an Endurance, which would have been able to stop that play from our opponent. So if we'd have played differently, we would have been able to take this game. But as it stands, we really struggle to beat what our opponent's doing. We don't really have creature removal, so what I do here is I go and get the Scavenging Ooze because this gives us enough creatures that we can get an extra turn. Now, do I think an extra turn is going to help us? Probably not. The Archon crashes, we put another creature in the graveyard, we lose our Gilded Drake as well, so then we're on 7. We have enough mana so that we can survive the next turn. We draw a land. Unfortunately, this land If we crack it to go and get a Dryad Arbor, we will die to our opponent's attack. So we have to then pump a bunch of mana into the Scavenging Ooze and attack. Our fetch land is switched off because we're effectively on 9 once this Archon attacks. So we have to lose the Scavenging Ooze here. We can't lose anything else. And then our opponent can kind of do whatever they want here because they've just won off of this Archon. And a Shouldered, so we die in our draw step. So we did make two mistakes, I think, in this matchup. The first mistake was boarding in the Faerie Macabre. I think we should have left the Faerie Macabre in the sideboard so we had a piece of Graveyard Hate we could go and fetch for. Obviously, fetching the Gilded Drake was fine in the end, but our opponent put us in a spot where we could have made a mistake, and we did. Now, some of the times that won't be a mistake. We could just save ourselves 3 life, because from my perspective, it was my opponent saying, I'm going to lose this creature anyway, let's see if I can get 3 points of damage in. That's how I saw it, so I thought, I'll save the damage, and that prevents, getting hit by some kind of Shallow Grave, which I have seen from our opponent's deck, and maybe that is the difference in damage. So that was the decision I made, and then ended up just being reanimated, and yeah, that was pretty awkward. Alright, let's go to round 4. We're currently 2-1. Alright, so we're on the draw for this one. This is our opening hand. So we have the ability to play Birds of Paradise and use that as blue mana that we can then ponder with. We can pitch our Leovold to the Force. It's a little bit sketchy, but we get 2 draw steps where we need to find land, really. And we have a ponder to help. So I think this is worth keeping. People are less likely to wasteland you if you play a Birds of Paradise out as well. Alright, so our opponent just goes against a swamp and they unmask targeting themselves, pitching an Archon of Cruelty. So this immediately says my opponent is playing Red-Black Reanimator, which means I need to interact with this. So what I do is I fire up the Force of Will, pitching the Leovold, stop them putting a creature in their graveyard because they're targeting themselves, and then we kind of move on, and we've sort of stopped our opponent's roll for a little bit. We go over to us, we draw another blue card, so just play out our Birds of Paradise and try and get the mana underneath us. Now we know that our mana is not going to be tapped because our opponent is a graveyard combo deck instead. Our opponent does nothing with their turn and passes back to us. So now we've found half of our combo by drawing this Nomads en-Kor. We want to ponder though because we want to be looking for more mana. So we find 2 pieces of land. So we keep both of them. This allows us to Living Wish for the Nadu. And we know we've got the land on top, so next turn we just get to go off based on what we have here. So there it is. And fetch it up, play the Nadu, play the Nomads, start drawing some cards. Our opponent wants to see a decent chunk of cards in our deck as we're clicking through this. We're going to clean up. Our opponent takes 1 draw and decides they've had enough. And that is the end of the first game. So this time when we're sideboarding, what I tend to do, or what I did do in fact, was keep 1 Faerie Macabre in the sideboard instead. So at least we have the option of getting some Graveyard Hate with the Living Wish. And I think that's a good idea. Alright, so our opening hand for this one. We have interaction with a turn 1 combo. We have the Living Wish for the Faerie Macabre. So, I keep this one. Our opponent immediately messes with our hand with an unmask and takes our Force of Will. Alright, we find a land. Again, we kept a hand that did need some land, but any blue land unlocked us and we could answer our opponent's deck. Like, our opponent's deck is a turn 1 combo deck most of the time, so we need to keep a hand that actually interacts with it. And any land would have found us the Living Wish. So our opponent does nothing, so I Brainstorm at their end step. And then we have a decent selection of things to work with. We put back a Ponder and a Bayou, I think it was. No, Ponder and a Ground Sea. There it is. So this turn, we can get the Living Wish going and just get a Faerie Macabre. And now we're covered from the graveyard for a while. Our opponent has to Thoughtseize us before they can do anything. They didn't do anything on their turn, so we go back to us. And now we can work towards the combo. So this is a turn where something embarrassing happens, I believe. So we cast a Living Wish. Put the Living Wish on the stack. And it gives you the option to click yes or no to Living Wish's ability. So I hovered my mouse over the yes. And then I had a twitch exactly as I went to click. And then click no. So that was really awkward because that just stopped us from winning the game next turn. So I typed the whoops in chat because that was very much a whoops. So in the end step, our opponent is casting an Entomb. Obviously, we have this covered with a Faerie Macabre, so I'm not too worried about this. But yeah, that a bad time to get a twitch. Right, our opponent does nothing with their turn and passes back. We have an Endurance, so we have just more coverage for our opponent's graveyard. So we cast a Ponder, and we find another Living Wish. So our physical error has been rectified. We get to Living Wish this turn, and then we decide what we're doing here. So I decide to Ponder, because I want to find another green card to go with Endurance. We just got 2 layers of protection. We do find a green card. We knew there was a Nadu on top, but we stack it so that we draw the Leovold. So this way, if our opponent discards and tries to stop our combo, rather than our protection against them, then they might take the wrong thing here. So they might take the Nadu, and then we can just Nadu and go again. As it so happens, our opponent plays out a Lotus Petal here. So what this Lotus Petal tells me is our opponent is probably trying to play Revolt. We've seen a Fatal Push from our opponent already. So I think, okay, what am I going to do here? I'm going to cast this Nadu. Then we're going to cast the Nomads. So now our opponent cracks this Petal, and they go for the Fatal Push. So we get to draw a card off of this. And then we put in our Nomads. Because we have another Nadu, it's fine. Like, it's not as if we can really interact with it anyway. So then it goes to our opponent's turn. They Grief. So they put the Grief on the stack. And then our opponent makes what I think is an error here. So they put the Evoke trigger on top. So the Evoke trigger will resolve first. So before they get to take a card from our hand, the Grief will be in the graveyard. Now, this is either a mistake, something that doesn't matter because it's not really going to make any difference, or it's bait. But if it's bait for us to use our Faerie Macabre, then it doesn't matter anyway. So I decide to fire off the Faerie Macabre because they've stacked them the wrong way around. They only have one mana available. So we take those two, and then they take our Nadu. So they either take our Nadu, or they take the thing that stops them from being able to ever do anything. And they need to have a bunch of other cards to do stuff, because they're only on 3 cards. They play a Lotus Petal. They animate Dead on our Nadu. So now they have a 2/4 creature that we've got to try and work our way through. Now, fortunately for us, we can just play this Leovold. And extra fortunately for us, I believe we draw a land this turn. Yep, so we draw a land so we can play the Leovold and hold up the Endurance, which is like the perfects here. And we just sit staring at each other for a sec. But when it comes to our turn, I think we grab a Lush Portico at our opponent's end step, actually, right? Yeah, okay. We surveil away a land. So now we can attack. And the way Nomads and en-Kor works, if they block the Nomads, we put the damage onto the Leovold. So now the Nomads doesn't take any damage, the Leovold hits them for 3. It's their turn, they play a Lotus Petal, then it's back to us. We draw a land. We're not going to play our lands out because we want to have access to 2 cards to put back via a Brainstorm. So this turn we attack with both our creatures. This time our opponent gets to block, and they block to prevent the most amount of damage, so you take 1 from the Nomads. There is an argument to play out the Misty Rainforest here, to go and fetch a forest, because our opponent might have Blood Moons in their deck, which is something the red-black reanimator deck sometimes pivots into out of the sideboard. I decide not to until I've drawn another land. Our opponent doesn't do anything on their turn. Right, so we draw another land now, so I'm happy to play out the Misty Rainforest because this gives us access to a basic forest in the face of something like a Magus to the Moon. So now we attack for our 1. Our opponent doesn't really care anymore, and they've just taken the full 4. So we could fetch a Dryad Arbor here, but I decided just to keep the Brainstorm, the fetch land because of the Brainstorm. Because if we Brainstorm, we want to be able to see more cards and shuffle away these 2 lands. So we draw a Green Sun Zenith for turn. So all we do is just go and put the Nadu on the stack, and then our opponent concedes immediately once we do a Green Sun Zenith with X is 3, because we're going to draw 8 cards plus another 2 off of this, and then the world is our oyster. We can flash this in, target a couple of times on a stack, all sorts. So we're basically going to draw our deck. So that puts us into the 3-1 after 4 rounds, which is a pretty good result, and all of our games have been 2-0 or 0-2 so far. So we're going into the final round now. Alright, so our opener looks alright to me. We've got Living Wish to find 1/2 of our combo, or important piece. We can play Delighted Halfling. We got loads of mana. We got Springheart Nantuko, which we can just use to generate a lot of threats. Our opponent leads off on a Prismatic Vista. My initial impression is either some kind of Omnitel style deck, or like a blue-white based control deck. I lead off with a Delighted Halfling here, and then our opponent fetches in their turn to ponder. They play an Arid Mesa, they get Tundra, and they play a Tamiyo. So now I get to play an uncounterable Grist, which feels like the sort of thing I want to do, given our opponent is showing us that they're some sort of control deck. So this is just a really difficult resource for them to deal with. So our opponent goes to their turn, and they deploy a Teferi. So they decide to bounce the token here rather than the Grist, which is fine. I'm not sure about that play personally, because by bouncing the Grist, they tie up our mana, whereas this, they don't really, like, they get rid of an object permanently, but it's like the least important object. So I decide to keep Tamiyo back so they don't have to take any damage on their Teferi. So I draw a Springheart Nantuko, and I bestow it on the Delighted Halfling. Then I play a Lush Portico. This gets us a 1/1 insect. And then we get to minus the Grist, sacking the insect. We kill the Tamiyo. Our opponent doesn't have any Brainstorm mana available, so that's just gone. They can't just flip it into the Planeswalker. And then our 2/3 Delighted Halfling gets to attack into the Teferi. That's an incredible exchange. It's gone very well for us right there. That was we had the Springheart Nantuko in hand already. I think it was the Lush Portico we drew for turn. So that was a really good turn. So now our opponent casts a Ponder, and they tap out for a 4th Eorlingus, I believe. There it is, yeah. So this 4th Eorlingus, they can either get the Monarch, but then we just trade the Monarch backwards and forwards. And that doesn't necessarily favour our opponent that well. So they want to just deal with our Grist. So take the annoying object out of play and remove our Grist. That's fine. So now we've got a selection of options available. So we start off our turn with a Ponder, so we have the most information to decide what we're doing. This way we get to keep the Brainstorm and do the fetch land now. So Brainstorm, draw some cards. Now we have the combo available to us. We get to make a token. We get to make another token. Then we cast this Living Wish, get the Nomads en-Kor, and we're just holding back with a 2-3 to cleanly block their 2-2. So our opponent has pondered and they shuffled, which suggests to me they might be lacking what they need. So now we've got an option here. We've got some powerful plays here. We could try and bait out some removal from our opponent, so I decided to put this Leovold into play. It's a powerful object that messes with a lot of our opponent's ability to do stuff. This way we can dig a little bit as well and find a little bit more insurance. So the Green Sun Zenith is a pretty good piece of insurance. So we're now presenting something that our opponent has to answer because it's just potent. You know, we have the Leovold, the fair plan here. So our opponent needs to have some kind of answer to clean that up. So our opponent taps down here for a Supreme Verdict. That taps them out of white mana. We get to keep our Springheart Nantuko because it was bestowed, and then they tap out fully for a Tamiyo. And it's over to us. We have the ability to just combo off here if our opponent doesn't have it. They have a Force of Will, so we just deploy the Halfling. So now our opponent's down to 1 card in hand. So they tap out for a big 4th Eorlingus. They've only got 1 card in hand, so they're going to have to find Force of Will to go with their blue card, or a blue card to go with their Force of Will, if that's what they have in hand. So we just take the damage, use our Life Turtle as a resource here. Our opponent gets to draw 1 additional card, and it's over to us. So because we played out the Delighted Halfling, we have the mana to Green Sun Zenith for Nadu. If this resolves, I can be guaranteed that we're going to be fine. So it does resolve. We play out the Nomads here, and then our opponent concedes immediately to the Nomads. So that was the first game there. So what do we do sideboard-wise? So I under-nerd about whether I wanted Force of Vigor, because Force of Vigor is a bit of a dead draw a lot of the time against our opponent's deck. But we do need to potentially answer a back to basics. So what I decided to do instead was board in this Boseiju, because our opponent's got lots of targeted removal, so having more lands for our Sylvan Safekeeper is a good idea, just in our deck. And if we're under a back to basics, it's probably going to be very difficult for us to Living Wish for a Boseiju and use it anyway, and they'll probably just counter the Living Wish. So I boarded in this Boseiju. I don't mind having more lands against a control deck where they're going to be trying to kill our birds and our Delighted Halflings. So I boarded in the Boseiju for this one. And I think I boarded out just the Scavenging Ooze. And that was pretty much all we did sideboard-wise. So our opponent's on the play. Our opening hand was pretty good here. We had a decent chunk of lands. We had this nice Boseiju we wanted. We had the Birds of Paradise to push ourselves out and a Green Sun Zenith to get whatever we needed. So we begin with the Birds of Paradise. Our opponent played an island, so if they want to remove this, they're going to have to do it on their turn. So this island is going to do nothing on their turn, effectively. If they'd have played out of Plains, I might have been more tempted to play the Ponder there. But our opponent plays out, flows Strand, and passes. It's over to us. We've drawn another Green Sun Zenith, which is not a bad thing to have. Let's go and fetch up our basics so we can play around back to basics later on if that's a thing that they have in their deck. We cast a Ponder. We find half of our combo and another Green Sun Zenith, so that sounds pretty tasty to me. I don't want to shuffle our library because we've got another Green Sun Zenith on top, and I'd rather fetch for a 3-drop here. So we're just going to pass it over to our opponent. They're now going to tap down for this Teferi, which gets to bounce our Birds of Paradise. So now I play out a Birds of Paradise, and we go and fetch a Delighted Halfling with a Green Sun Zenith so that we have uncounterable stuff potentially in our future. That also means that our opponent is wanting to remove it, and it's also a creature with power. So it kind of does the most things possible for us. Having a creature with power and our opponent has a Teferi is useful. They immediately remove it because they might not be able to leverage a counterspell in their hand if that's in play. And that's clearly an important thing to our opponent. They cast a Ponder and they keep it. Now it's our turn. We get to Green Sun Zenith here. So we put a Nadu in play, and then we attempt the Nomads. Our opponent has a Pyroblast here. So now we have a Misty Rainforest in play. So we have a pretty sweet line available to us soon. So our opponent now has a Teferi on 3, and they go and fetch a white source. So I'm expecting some sort of sweeper here, and that's exactly what happened. However, we get to clean up the Teferi really nicely here, because we go and crack this, we get ourselves the Dryad Arbor. We untap. Now we get to Ponder first, because we know what we're fetching here anyway. There's another Green Sun Zenith, so we put the Green Sun Zenith into our hand. So that way we can just take 1 card off the Ponder because we're shuffling anyway. So then we cast the Green Sun Zenith, we put Bristly Bill into play, and then we do our Verdant Catacombs to pump our Dryad Arbor. We crack it for a Lush Portico to pump our Dryad Arbor again, get a little bit of extra value. There's a Brainstorm, very happy about that. Dryad Arbor is nice and chunky. Our opponent's only got an island, so I don't expect them to kill our creature. Smash in with the Dryad Arbor to take out the Teferi. And all in all, a very good exchange in that turn cycle for us. Yes, we did get Wrath, but we came back very nicely. And now we've got a decent amount of pressure in play that our opponent has to respect. And we're also drawing into Brainstorm and stuff. Now our opponent plays out this back to basics, which is something that I did mention when I was sideboarding. And I sported this Boseiju in specifically for. So we only get to attack for 2. Our Dryad Arbor doesn't get to attack because it unfortunately is a land here. But we have the Boseiju. We wait for our opponent's turn, and we're going to Boseiju at the end when they don't know that we're going to be untapping all of our things. So they play out a Narset, which they think is going to live, but we know it's not going to live. They remove our creature, expecting to just have the board locked down. And then at end step, we destroy their back to basics. If we don't destroy their back to basics at end step and do it earlier, our opponent might well play that turn differently and have a way of cleaning up our Dryad Arbor and being able to get another card out of this Narset, which is not something we want to happen. So our opponent's only got 1 card in hand. We have this Living Wish. So we attack into the Narset here because we want to be able to use our Brainstorm. So this unlocks our Brainstorm, so we can fire it off. And then our Brainstorm finds us our combo of Nadu and Nomads en-Kor. So I'm like, okay, sometimes the magic gods smile upon you. So I tap down for this Nadu, I tap down for this Nomads, and our opponent says, no thank you, and they scoop up the game. And that is the end of the league, and we finished with a really nice 4-1. The round we lost, we did make an error in one of the games. I think we're probably going to lose that when our opponent's on the play in game 3, but we might have been able to eke that one out a little bit longer if we sideboarded differently, and also if we made a play differently around that Gilded Drake. We would have got an extra turn of the game out, as well as a little bit more life and another card deeper. So it would have actually worked out considering that card was the Endurance. We didn't know that at the time. We didn't play around what our opponent had. We tried to conserve our life total for things like Shallow Grave and stuff. But yeah, deck felt pretty smooth. Let's talk about the list. So this list felt like the best shell that I've played a Living Wish in since I can remember. It felt like it wasn't just a clunky thing we were doing. It felt like an actually good part of our plan that had a lot of utility. Like when you're going off, it allows you to find that other piece to really accelerate and make sure that you go off and win that turn. Otherwise, it's finding you really powerful things to curve into, or it's finding you your combo. And the fact that it's just a tutor for Nomads en-Kor felt great. And if you're tutoring for Nomads en-Kor, it's probably going to be cheaper than Lord of Calling without having you to commit all your stuff. So I really was impressed by the Living Wish. It does allow you to have some stuff in your sideboard that you wouldn't necessarily want in your main deck. I don't think we're leveraging that very well here, but I think that's something you could do. Gilded Drake is probably the most sort of card you don't want in your main deck that you want in your sideboard of all the things we have. But I think we could do a bit better than that. I wasn't convinced by the Cavern or the Caracas being in our deck, or in our sideboard even, so we could remove these and have the card that I think we are definitely missing in our 75, which is Collector Roof. Having 1 Collector Roof in the sideboard so that we can tutor for it would be really handy. Having 1 in the main and 1 in the sideboard would be really good because then we'd have lots of tutors for it. But can we realistically do that? Because what would we be cutting here? I think Graveyard Hate is more important than Artifact Hate, so we probably don't really want the Scavenging Ooze to be replaced by a Collector Roof. And obviously the Scavenging Ooze, like I said, should be Keen-Eyed Curator. Look at this little raccoon guy. What a friendly chap. This is definitely what I would play over the Scavenging Ooze for sure. Not just because it looks cool, but I think it is better than the Scavenging Ooze right now. So I would probably want the Keen-Eyed Curator over the Scavenging Ooze. And in this meta, I don't think you want to have the Collector Roof instead of the Scavenging Ooze, but if the meta changes, then that's probably the slot you swap out, because Endurance is removal for graveyards whilst also being a thing that lets you re-go with your entire library. Just put all your graveyard back into your library and then go through it all again with your Nadu combo. And everything else is pretty much essential to how the deck operates. I guess Leovold is like the other sort of flex-ish slot, but I do quite like having the Leovold in there. It seems like it's quite a useful thing to be able to go and find off your Green Sun Zenith. So yeah, the main change I would do would be to turn this into Keen-Eyed Curator and maybe drop these. What you could do with these two is turn this into 2 Collector Roofs, right? So when you go to sideboarding, you board in 1 and leave 1 in the sideboard. That way you've got 9 copies of Collector Roof in your deck if you include Living Wish. That is something to think about, and I think I'd probably get more use out of it than these 2 cards. But if I'm missing something that's really obvious, please let me know if there's some kind of card that stops our combo, because like Leovold doesn't stop the combo because this stops draw effects, whereas Nadu isn't a draw effect. It just puts the card into your hand or the battlefield. So I'm not sure we need the Cracker to bounce anything specific. It's just a nice tool to have, but maybe we could have a more impactful tool in the form of a Collector Roof. What I will say is the Caracas that is also one of our only ways of interacting with creatures, which is something we're a bit shy of, which is actually a thing I like about this deck, because it's a very powerful thing that we're doing. We absolutely crunched through a bunch of rounds today, and it felt like we were absolutely cruising. When we get some bannings in like a week's time, this is probably one of the things I would keep an eye out for, various Nadu decks, because I think they're going to rise to the top when people aren't stripping away their hand with like scam stuff. And I think this deck is very powerful and gets around a lot of things because it's not actually a draw trigger and there's lots of ways you can play it. But what I like about this deck is that it has a weakness. We don't get to run anything to interact with creatures here. We just have the Force of Will. Now, there's definitely been loads of combo decks in the past where you just rely on Force of Will as your thing, and maybe, you know, a few chump blocks here and there or whatever, which is kind of what we're doing. But that means it's very difficult for us to interact with creatures. We don't have any Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exiles or Prismatic Endings, whatever. We've just got like our Grist and the Gilded Drake in the sideboard. I think having a deck that's powerful and does a thing, but has a weakness, is something that can be exploited. And that is something I like to see in Magic the Gathering. I don't just like seeing a deck where, oh, everything it does is just really good. And if you can try and exploit that weakness, they just pitch everything to Psychic Frog and it doesn't matter. And that's not what's happening here, which is really nice to see. It's also nice to play a blue deck that doesn't have Psychic Frog in, even though it is playing blue and black mana. I am expecting 100% for Grief to go, and I suspect we should be getting a Psychic Frog ban as well next week. If we don't, I think that's probably a mistake, but I could be wrong, but that's just my thoughts on the subject. Hopefully we do get it and we get to have a big refresh of the meta and everything goes a bit more smoothly, I would say. But yeah, this deck really impressed me. The best Living Wish deck I've played. It was fun to play. There was a lot of cool options available because we're tutoring, we're cantripping, and we're not just stone cold to a bunch of stuff because we have the Force of Wills. We've got some nice little silver bullets, so we play a little bit like Cradle Control in some ways, where we can go and find our endurance that we need, or our Grist, or go looking at our sideboard for whatever. And that is a really fun experience to play. So would definitely recommend this deck, and nobody made us click through it, which is also another great thing to think about too. And I think that's done for today. Sorry that I did not have success with my microphone today. I think there was an update to the software I used to record, and it reset my settings so it wasn't recording through my main audio microphone. It was just recording through something else, which is obviously annoying because it didn't record any sound. But hopefully this was all right for you, and it was a really fun league, so I hope you managed to get some joy out of that one. All right, please remember to like and subscribe. It does help the channel out and doesn't cost you anything. And with the format about to get a shake-up with some bannings next week, definitely keep an eye. Like, being a subscriber means that you don't miss out on any of my content, so you get to see what Legacy looks like after the bannings. So why not be one of my subscribers and also help me get towards that 4K mark of subscribers. All right, thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed this one, and I hope you did too, and goodbye. If you'd like to support me in the channel, please check out my Patreon. It has a free guide to budget turbo depths as well as 3 tiers of support. A low-cost one that enters you into my monthly raffle for a free donation deck on the channel, a mid-tier subscription that gives you access to my detailed turbo depths guide that is updated every month as well as regular articles, and lastly, the higher tier gives you all of the above as well as a monthly donation deck for my channel. If you're interested in supporting the channel this way, please check out the link in the description.